Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. This time, we're playing Pictomancer, and while we did not have very much variety in type of content this time around either, we did have a lot of variety in what duties we got. For the first duty, we start with one of the optional level 100 dungeons, so if you don't want to see that, jump to this timestamp here. With that said, we went to Tender Valley. One thing I enjoyed making extensive use of in this run on AoE pools was using Living Muse and then swift casting creature motifs such that I could have another Living Muse ready for when the pack is fully pulled, so I was certain to have Mhach or Medine for it as well. One mistake that I felt I did make throughout the duty was that once I had collected some white paint, I could have saved Striking Muse for when the pack was fully pulled and instead used Holy and White leading up to it. Saving Striking Muse for the full pack would certainly have been better damage. Weirdly, the second boss was the one causing the most trouble for me. First, I was unlucky with being an inch too close to a line AoE, stubbing my toe. Shortly after, I was not the best at planning ahead, leading to me being a bit boxed in by the spread markers and various AoEs. Fortunately, no one died as a result. For duty 2, we went to Eden's Verse Furor, the one with Raktapaxa, the Melon Man. An interesting detail about Pictomancer in this level range is that before you get Comet in black, using Holy just for the sake of it is actually beneficial. However, if you're still learning the job, it might be a bad habit to get used to this looking forward. But it is a damage gain to use in a level 80 raid. With that said, knowing this does make Pictomancer feel a lot more mobile at level 80. This particular fight also comes with several points where you can't attack anything for a little bit. Perfect for planning motifs if you ever needed a fight to practice this on. What I mean by this is instead of making motifs when you're safe to do so, you try to wait until the boss becomes untargetable as long as it doesn't delay your usage of these cooldowns. This is, of course, extra effective if you remember exactly when these untargetable sections happen. For duty 3, we have Guildhest Under the Armor, which is a duty where Pictomancers actually only have 2 buttons, one of them being a 2-minute defensive cooldown. Fun. For duty 4, we also have Guildhest Under the Armor, so that's 2 duties done in like 1 minute combined. Well then. For duty 5, we are an instant replacement in Weeping City of Mhach. It is quite interesting that in this level range, due to having no Starry Muse, the Pictomancer rotation is simpler in a way, because the box you're supposed to fit everything in isn't there, so you can just use cooldowns whenever. Although, there is a benefit to using Living Muses during any other raid buffs if possible, and, if you can, delaying the Hammer Stamps, but not Striking Muse, until you are benefiting from a buff if there is one forthcoming. With that said, this Alliance raid has a lot of weird details, so let's talk about some of them. For the first boss, a particularly obscure detail is that when you get thrown up on the web here, a spider ad will spawn. When killed, it produces this muddy hole, and if you step into it, it drops you into the lower part of the arena, allowing you to break these key knots, causing the web to fall. You need to do this to get past this phase. There's also a scorpion ad that you'd really like to have a tank here for. For the second boss, it has this Mega Death mechanic. Whenever the boss starts casting Mega Death, you want to stand such that you get hit by one of the green circles, as getting hit by more than one actually makes you into a zombie, where just one makes it so that Mega Death won't kill you. For the third boss, Ozma, when it turns into a triangle, it means it will shoot a powerful laser down each of the 3 lanes, so get out of there. When it turns into a cube, it instead strikes in a donut AoE, hitting the bridges between the lanes, so get close. Throughout the fight, the boss also just shoots each tank with a line AoE for an auto attack. Finally, these dark spread markers are meant to be put far away, as they turn into proximity AoEs. There should be space for one in the back of each lane and one on each bridge, but it can get problematic if 2 teams place their second one on the same bridge. For the final boss, there's a lot going on, but I would say the meanest mechanic is penetration. It is actually a gaze mechanic, but it has no indicator of being that. If you look, you get grabbed into the center and take massive damage. I only fully realized this myself recently by having it explained by my friends, and this is actually the first time I got it right. I would even have suggested it was the first time I did this fight flawlessly, but I forgot to help the entangled players in the intermission, and I got hit by lasers right at the end, so oh well. For duty 6, we have Shiva Extreme with a bunch of first-timers. We do have a fellow mentor as tank though. For our first try, we went in without explaining anything, just to let the Sprout see what's up. Throughout the attempt, the mentor tank even made sure to take care of things whenever possible to make it easier on the other tank who didn't know. That way, we made it all the way to wiping to the bow knockback, sending too many players to become ice boulders. After that, we went on to explain how the fight goes in some detail. Then, we wiped to the sword cleave during the ad phase, killing both healers. Then, we wiped to the bow cleave, and then the knockback caused too many to land in ice boulders and it turned into chaos and we wiped again. And then, we wiped to the bow cleave, bringing into question exactly what is meant by behind, as both our healers died. For the final attempt, we started with staff, then sword, and while the stack wasn't done properly, both tanks sharing it is survivable. Did you know that the sword stack ignores defensive cooldowns and invulnerabilities? For the second sword during ads, we lost a healer to the Glacier Bash. Throughout the fight, the tanks had made an agreement to tank swap so that one tank didn't tank both weapons, as while that is perfectly possible, it is really demanding on the healers. Going into the second half of the fight, here's a tip about finding the safe spot for the circle AoEs here. The first set of AoEs are exactly where the second set won't be, so you can prepare in advance by moving up to one of them. I also recommend, if you get there first, to stand further out so whoever else that comes to your spot can safely stand there regardless of which of you get a spread marker, if you get one. After this mechanic, we had a healer and an ice boulder to save. And for the spiraling circle AoEs, a tip for Pictomancer is to remember that if you swift cast a motif, it gives you a clean 4 seconds to just run around. For the bow phase, we finally had Shiva phased into a wall, making it almost trivial to dodge the initial cleave. Also, since Shiva was all the way to the wall, it was no big deal if people got knockbacked in a big clump, although it would be annoying. What would be a problem though is if, say for example, a handful of players got pushed and then slippery floor happens and then people panic and run over and become ice boulders. If you start slipping around, consider stopping movement completely and take in your situation before you move again so you don't slide exactly where you shouldn't go. And more importantly, if you are a boulder, make sure you aren't holding the exact same direction to become a boulder again after you get freed. With that out of the way, we did finally beat it this time, despite that. For duty 7, we went to mount ordeals against Rubicante with 4 mages, 3 of which were Pictomancers. This particular fight I never managed to do enough times to really internalize how the floor patterns worked, so I heavily relied on everyone else's positioning, which, fortunately for me, worked out. Just before the ad phase starts, there's just about enough time for one motif, but do take note that after the ad phase, there is a forced cutscene, so consider holding that 2-minute burst. Aside from that, the run went well. For duty 8, we went to Kugane Ohashi, which is a classic trial for everything to go sideways in. For the most part, things actually went super well here, although when the boss split, we ran into some trouble. While this might look like the Gunbreaker just refusing to let the Paladin have one of them, what is actually happening is that somehow the Gunbreaker ended up with a ton of enmity on both of them. How? I'm not actually sure. But the Paladin made very little to no attempt at grabbing aggro, and it seems they had a lot to work through. Or they could use Provoke, which it seems they didn't. We barely managed to save it anyway when the Gunbreaker died, resetting their enmity, and it was a lot easier for the Gunbreaker to figure it out than the Paladin, it turned out. It was very clear the Paladin was probably a first-timer to this fight, both from this, but also from the chains going sideways. The closer you are to Greg when the tethers resolve, the tankier your chain will be, and ultimately, if you're all the way up at him, it is often not possible to save you and the other players too. This did go a lot better than last time though. For duty 9, we went to Storm's Crown against Barbariccia, one very chaotic fight as well. Right at the start, we had a quite funny situation where one of the healers helped with the tank stack, although they did live it, so no harm done, right? No other major incidents happened throughout the fight, aside from me using Winged Muse before Mhach of the Ages this one time. Oh, the horror! Over 1,000 potency lost! In an instant! And finally for duty 10, we complete the Arc-Fiend trial set with Golbez. To start this fight, I quickly learned that Starry Muse's area is so large that things like Terrastorm is hardly a concern, as long as the grassy field is placed closer to the center. And, while some got hit by almost every blade in Phase 1, we got through with 0 deaths. For the first Shadow Crescent, only one of the tanks got hit, leading into the double meteors where both were handled perfectly. Again, 0 deaths. Gale Spheres came next, which also was dealt with easily, leading into Void Stardust, which only the Monk got hit by twice, but somehow lived. Next, for the Eventide Fall double line stacks. Again, everything went to plan, leading into another Gale Spheres with no one being hit. However, the immediate follow-up Shadow Crescent called 4 players, but again, no deaths. Just to reiterate how huge the Starry Muse circle is, I placed it almost as badly as I could have, and I still have space to stand inside safely during this Terrastorm. The Shadow Crescent that followed after did catch some more players though, almost like the group is slowly unraveling as the fight goes on. Fortunately, it was already over by then. Again, way easier than last time. But I was healing last time, right? Does that mean I'm bad at healing? No, it must be them who were wrong. I have to say, when I suddenly started getting under the armor Guildhests back to back, I started to get worried that this was going to get really boring very fast. It also did not help that a majority of my queues this time were 7 to 10 minutes, I believe. The curse of DPS, I suppose. I'm glad we had a rematch with Shiva Extreme again also. I can speak from experience and say that the fight is actually doable with 1 tank, 1 healer and 1 DPS, but it might even be doable with 2 tanks and a healer, or 2 healers and a tank, if you get a bit of echo, if that is even necessary. The only reason you need 3 players is just to meet the Harden Rage too. I'll put a link to a video I did on this in the description if you're interested. Anyway, that's not meant to make fun of anyone in the run we did, but more to say that the fight is very lenient, so it is almost always possible to recover and keep going as long as 1 tank and 1 healer is still standing. Many of the mechanics are also surprisingly lenient in that as long as you don't get hit by 2 of them, you'll live. Like, for example, in the staff phase, if you don't get the spread marker, then you can live any one of the circle AoEs. Similarly, the first set of circle AoEs where there is only 1 safe spot. If you can't reach the safe spot in time, I recommend just making sure you get hit by at most 1 circle. Again, you will live 1 and the Vuln stack will time out eventually. The stack cleave from the Sword and Shield phase is also lenient in that everyone in the cleave will survive if you have either 2 tanks or pretty much just 3 players in it. A Scholar with a really large shield can also replace a tank for duoing the stack. In the same fashion, while it is a lot more painful, you don't even need to tank switch in this fight, since 1 tank can survive getting hammered with the resistance down stacks. It just requires a lot more effort from the healers, which is why you might not want to do that. With all that said, I am quite glad we had a different kind of emphasis in this set, as it also balances out our Dawntrail total much more nicely. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, or perhaps more of an observation, some jobs have actions specifically intended for downtime, like Samurai and Monk's meditations or Reaper's Soul Sow. But where all these downtime buttons give a rather small benefit, Pictomancer's motifs essentially makes them the ultimate job at maximizing the value of downtime when done well. Up to 12 seconds of downtime can be used before the Pictomancer even starts to look around for something else to do.